Welcome to the Daily Exchange, guys. We're back here. We're talking with Mike Lowy, co-founder of Tide Foundation, about his privacy protocol and China's new digital currency in the dark side of blockchain. We'll see you guys right after this. All right, guys, welcome back. We're here with Mike Lowy. Mike, co-founder of Tide. Welcome to the Daily Exchange.
Thank you very much.
Good to be here. We've got some concerns. We're talking about the Chinese digital currency and its increasing need for privacy and security around the world. Now, you are from the Tide Foundation. You work to solve a lot of these problems. Tell us, what's Tide all about?
Tide is a privacy protocol that aims to provide an incentive for businesses that are handling sensitive consumer data to embrace privacy.
Okay, awesome stuff. And now, right now, there's obviously a lot of big data going on. Big data with, China with its potentially with its central bank digital currency, right, and tracking things. Now, I guess we're going to talk a lot about that today and the dark side of blockchain, guys. There is some links down below. Check it out. If you want to skip ahead to any of the timestamps, check them out. They're just down below if you're rewatching this. But obviously, you guys that are watching live right now, you can't click those links. Okay. Now we've got a lot of quite negative press coming out right now about personal data, Facebook, Sony, Equifax, major hacks going on, big data breaches. It was 2013 was Yahoo. Even that was pretty big. We've got I think we've got the biggest data breaches. We've got a little picture here, Joel. If you want to bring that up for everyone, it's what do we got here? We got the Marriott, Yahoo 3 billion. That's pretty up there. Marriott at 500 million. Adult Friend Finder 412 million records. It's a lot of records.
It's a lot of angry friend
A
finders.
lot of people who are unfriendly. So with this, we've got, I guess, a lot of the flip side as well. We've got sort of online autonomy, we've got ownership of the digital self, but all of this potentially also could be, seen to be, where people are being tracked. And we might call this, what we're calling potentially the dark side of blockchain. And I want to talk a little bit about that. What do you see as the dark side of blockchain potentially?
One of the properties of blockchain is its immutability, the permanence of information that's locked into the blockchain, and the traceability of that information if it's not stored in a way that protects people's identities. So the potential for that to be used for nefarious purposes is significant.
Okay.
If we don't put the right kind of frameworks in place to avoid that.
Okay. Now, Tide, you guys say, privacy is more than a human right. It's an asset, which is kind of cool. Tell us, what's the problem that Tide's trying to solve?
So the concept for Tide actually was born out of a previous startup the same founders built. And that particular business held a significant amount of sensitive consumer information collected from personal IoT devices. And we as a small business were answerable to enterprise clients like Kellogg's and pharmacy chains. Initially, they were concerned about working with an organization like us. What happens if you get breached? Our name gets dragged through the mud. What happens when the introduction of privacy legislation like GDPR comes into play and we're up for fines of up to 4% of global turnover because you stuff up? And our solution to that and our desire to have a business model that wasn't about putting something shiny in front of individuals interacting with our platform and harvesting them for all they're worth was the concept that became Tide, which was to go back to those enterprise clients and say, well, what if we collect that data, but the only key to accessing that information remains with the individual? Mm-hmm. That then means that they have a really clear consent-based process to know exactly how we're using their information, when we're using it, And if we trade that information, it can only be done with their permission.
Okay, so users having their data, not the companies or governments, and they're controlling sort of, when, where, how. Do you see that future? When do you think that's going to happen?
I believe that that actually makes commercial sense today. And with privacy legislation like GDPR and enormous fines that are starting to come into play now, with mass data breaches where you've got the biggest companies in the world with enormous cybersecurity budgets struggling to secure that information, it actually makes sense to embrace privacy. It makes commercial sense to remove the liability of handling that sensitive information. But in our case, also opening up significant new revenue streams. Our ability to trade the insights that we had in this business on the individuals interacting with us, almost as a joint asset with the permission of the individual, if that was traded with someone's identity, became a significant revenue stream for us.
Okay. Now let's talk about, so right now, Mr. Jinping, the president currently, is he the president of China? I'm not sure. He is bringing out this new coin. It's called the digital, it's a DCEP, digital currency electronic payment. It's for the China National People's Congress. And now I'll just quote here, he's quoted as saying, it's necessary to strengthen the guidance and regulation of blockchain technology to implement the rule of law into the network management of blockchain. Now, this is interesting, right? So there's this crossover right now where, potentially this new coin, which could be all transparent, I guess, and obviously particularly the government could see all the movements of people. And the data then of their transactions potentially might not be your data. It might be the government's data or anyone else who wants to have a look at that. If you were to, step back a bit, do you think this digital currency is being used to create a social credit system in China?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say without a doubt, the existing social credit system is based on other behaviours. It makes sense to me that it's likely to kind of continue on that same track.
Okay, and do you think potentially also that this may again, so obviously that social credit system being a tracking of your movements or tracking of your spending and all those kind of things, and this coin potentially being a way to track that even further, and do you think this might be a concern in other countries as well?
Yeah, look, personally, on a personal level, like I'm quite glad we don't have a system like that in Australia, and I'm also happy that there are some initiatives in the blockchain space at the governmental level to foresee some of those types of challenges. It's certainly something that would want to avoid.
Okay, and I guess with your privacy protocol, do you see potentially central bank coins being one of your applications or potential clients there?
Yes, I mean I actually wrote a piece proposing that Libra should adopt a privacy protocol and have that privacy element baked into the ecosystem. If you look at the national interest of the US, introducing a digital currency makes a lot of sense. Having that championed by a business that is also synonymous with exploiting consumers is, I think, hampering their efforts to get something like that off the ground, which is why I proposed that element should be baked trustlessly into the ecosystem, and it's certainly a threat to the Chinese equivalent.
And with this central this central currency, do you think China potentially is trying to dethrone the US dollar?
Yeah, no doubt. It's going to be a battle of digital currencies between various national interests.
Okay, and we've obviously got the the Belt and Road Initiative by China right now, rolling out around the world, moving from China all the way through Europe into Africa. Actually, that was the old trade route, I believe, back in the day. And do you think this digital coin, obviously it doesn't have this privacy protocol you're talking about now, and Europe's big. GDPR is big on privacy. Do you think they'll stop this?
I would say that it's going to be a massive. I guess there's two ways to look at it. The introduction of a digital currency just makes a lot of sense. It removes a lot of barriers, removes a lot of friction, increases adoption, and that adoption gives a central bank a lot of leverage from an economic perspective. It just makes a lot of sense. I think without that privacy element, you're going to struggle to gain global adoption. And the limitations will hit the border.
Okay. Now, according to the ABC News, the city of Shenzhen, which borders Hong Kong, has been selected potentially as a pilot for this currency. And now, obviously, China has a lot of very tight laws around capital. It's been reported that $1 trillion worth of capital has left China over the past decade. And I'll quote here from the State Council in an August statement. Support in innovative applications such as digital currency research and mobile payment in Shenzhen, pioneering the promotion of RMB internationalization, developing cross-border financial supervision. Do you think that this might help reduce capital risk from the flight of capital from China?
I can see the logic in it, and it certainly fits within, I guess, what I understand to be the economic policy of China. As to how effective it's going to be, I would question that. I don't think that massive exits of money are in the form of non-traceable cash, for example. So most of that money is moving in a format that is, I think, traceable anyway. So I don't think it's going to have a massive impact.
Okay. Now, you talked a lot about Australia's obviously recently introduced a ban on cash payments over $10,000. It has a 2-year jail fine and a fine of $25,000. It's quite intense. Do you think Australia as well, like in terms of might want to, are they considering, to maybe chip away at their privacy by introducing a central bank coin?
Australia, Australia, it's not alone. There's a lot of kind of a big juxtaposition between new privacy legislation that is aiming to give consumers unprecedented rights to privacy and control of their information. And yet, on the other hand, when you look at encryption laws, for example, give government almost unfettered access to that information. So there's kind of a differentiation between government's access to that information and the right to privacy with organisations that an individual interacts with. But we're under no illusions that an organisation like Tide can take on a government, but certainly we can help put the right kind of frameworks in place to protect the right to privacy and put the necessary safeguards in so that it can't be exploited.
Okay. Now, obviously there's some negative ways that blockchain can be used to some extent. Maybe this is, these tracking and things like that. Now, the government's been talking a bit about portable KYC data. And in other words, getting someone's identity from one, if you want to do, KYC with one bank, you want to move to another, something obviously Find is very passionate about as well. But moving that data between institutions, how do you think governments could keep that private?
Last time you and I saw each other was in Canberra, where at the National Blockchain Roadmap Initiative, and one of the big conversations was around a blockchain-based framework that enables portability of KYC and AML information, very private, very sensitive information that most businesses, certainly in the financial sector, have no choice but to collect, and individuals have no choice but to give it up in the current context. For that information to be breached is not just costly for the organisation, but obviously for individuals from an identity theft point of view, and all kinds of other problems that would create. The ability to put the necessary kind of safeguards in place so that information could be accessed only by who should and needs to have access to that information is possible using blockchain, using the trustless properties of blockchain, whereby I as an individual can provide access to information, but I don't need to rely on an organisation carte blanche to do that. I can use a a trustless or a decentralized environment to manage those permissions in a way that I have certainty that when someone accesses that information, I know about it and I've provided that access.
Okay, so really giving the user control, and the government sort of creating this framework and maybe using something like Tide in that as well. Do you think in the future we'll have more or less privacy?
I think the way we're heading, we can expect less. There's more and more devices and data being generated that is effectively tracking our behaviours, and without, I guess, the foresight to see how access to that information is being used, it can certainly be exploited. And from a commercial perspective, if the right frameworks aren't in place, then the incentive is to exploit it. Like in the current environment, you sign up online for an account and you've given away effectively your right to privacy, and you are being monetized. The approach to Tide today is to remove the liability for businesses handling that data and provide that commercial incentive to embrace it, which makes sense in the long term. But equally, if you kind of fast forward to think about how with all of this data, it's not just about the data, it's about what the data represents, which is our intentions, our mind share, and ensuring that access to that mind share is a right of the individual to decide who they share that with.
Okay. Now, when you're approaching companies right now with Tide, what kind of companies are you approaching? And I guess who's quite receptive?
To date, Europe's been like a huge stomping ground for us. They've been facing the brunt of GDPR. There's Fortune 500 companies spend upwards of $15 million a year just on compliance. That's just spending money in order to not get fined. So it's there's a significant kind of economic driver for those businesses. More recently, you've got the California Privacy Act that's come into effect. So we're seeing the US heating up a lot, and we're getting a good reception over there.
So with Tide, are there any companies that hate Tide? They're like, oh, I don't, or they don't want to be involved.
Facebook haven't returned my phone calls just yet, but I would suggest that strategically it makes sense for them, even in the long term, to embrace privacy, and not just in rhetoric, but in fact.
Okay. Last question, I guess, before you go, Mike. The price of Bitcoin, we ask everyone. New Year's Eve 2019. It's going to be a big day. We had a lot of predictions all throughout this year. What do you think the price in US dollars of Bitcoin will be? Look at this. We're in Halloween here. We've got our leg. I don't think we should just leave our leg. We've got a skull. Price of Bitcoin. Bitcoin's doing quite well today as well.
I'm no expert. I guess I see it hover between 7 and 10K. Mm-hmm. I would suspect with 1 month to go, you probably see it kind of hover just between that range. But you never know. War with Iran, blowing up of oil fields. Buy some Bitcoin.
Okay. Any final price numbers? You got an exact number at all? This is not financial advice, by the way, guys. We don't do financial advice. No financial advice on this show.
I'll have to peg it at 8K.
8K, there it is. All right. And I guess that was obviously our last question, but I think Mike, do you think that the central bank Chinese currency is a good or a bad thing?
I guess it depends on how far I zoom out. I think long-term digital currency is a necessary practicality. It just makes sense. I think the form it's likely to take in China is going to be limited. Like I said, it's going to struggle to go outside of the border, and I don't think it's necessarily something that's going to, let's say, be a positive impact to people outside of China. But zooming out, the embracing of blockchain, which and digital currency, which removes so many of the friction points that are holding back, economic models that just make much more sense. I think that's a positive. So,
okay, brilliant stuff. All right, Mike, thanks for joining us on the Daily Exchange.
Thank
All right,
you.
guys, girls and guys, do subscribe. Click the button, follow us. You get great interviews like Mike here telling us all about the Chinese digital currency and privacy. We'll see you guys later. Yeah.